So some people may have thought the road to the fiscal cliff was sort of smooth and flat, and then you hit the cliff. Turns out it's a roller coaster. And we were up last week. This week we're down.
Right. We have an election, and we end up with the status quo in the House and the Senate and the White House. And then it turns out we have the status quo again with the debt talks. I mean, we're back where we started. They essentially spent a whole week doing this sideshow kind of negotiation on Plan B. There hasn't been any real substantive talks. And we're getting to the point now where we're actually pretty close to the edge, and there's not a lot of stuff to show for it.
And Plan B just extends tax cuts for just about everybody in the country, but doesn't fix many of the underlying problems, which is just a sign that the talks either weren't moving fast enough or far enough for House Republicans.
Right, it's interesting because both sides made some concessions.
Exactly,
they were making progress. You know, there was compromise on both sides. And as Obama pointed out in his press conference the other day, they're not that far apart. They were headed toward a place where it looked like they were getting close, and then all of a sudden it was derailed. And Obama said, I don't understand, they just need to take the deal. And I mean, they're not going to just take the deal, but it was a little bit surprising to just see things go off the rails when they were moving in the right direction.
Right, and what's confusing is that like what we all had thought going in would be the big moments of concession were actually achieved early this week, or late last week. And John Boehner takes Republicans to a place where they are willing to accept some tax rate increases, $1 million and above in income, but still that broke the back of that question. And President Obama said we can live with reducing the inflation rate for Social Security benefits, which means a lower benefits on Social Security. So he's taken an entitlement cut. You would have thought those were the big moments, and it turns out wasn't enough.
Right, and what's really interesting and confusing about this for families and businesses is everyone's used to Washington theatrics and these, you know, fake votes and ploys and trying to get leverage. It's really hard to tell what exactly is happening. You know, is it as bad as it looks? Is it as confusing as it seems? Or is there really, you know, going to be some coalescing at the end where they sort of shake hands, everyone sort of said that they did their best to try to get the most out of the other side? At this point, it's hard to see a scenario where they do kind of jump out in a couple days and shake hands and say, you know, we did the best we could.
Well, I've got a question about that, though, because we've been having these discussions kind of at high altitude, you know, high salary levels. But I know people who are in our income level who actually supplement the incomes of, say, elderly parents who are on fixed incomes, you know, through no fault of their own. They worked hard, but their salaries never got high enough to bring in huge benefits, so their kids are actually trying to help them. Well, if this thing actually washes out, then it's the kids who suddenly don't have as much disposable income. So what happens to the parent that you've been trying to keep off of, you know, other federal doles, keep them off of food stamps, keep them off of all these other federal programs by supplementing their incomes? What happens to all of us, actually? I
mean, the impact of going over the fiscal cliff, let's say there's no agreement, it'll be a real jolt. Mostly, the biggest impact will be on the tax side. Folks' taxes will really go up, everybody's. You know, you're going to see maybe $100 or $200 per paycheck extra going to the federal government. And that's real, that's grocery money, that's gas money, and that's kind of a real
Because
impact.
not only do tax rates go up, the payroll tax reduction that was put in effect 2 years ago also goes away at the same time.
Right.
And there's your immediate impact as well.
Exactly. And then when the money starts being cut from, you know, federal programs, you're going to see the impact all over the place. So, you know, the impasse, both sides, I think, see a little bit of an advantage of maybe dipping into January with a brief stalemate. But if you get much further, it can really cause a problem.
No, and I think the assumption has to be that you can undo. Congress is Congress. They can do and they can undo whatever they feel like doing or undoing, mostly, and they'll roll all that back and people will get made whole later. But in the short term, you know, later is later, the short term is now, and I don't think you can deny that there's a real and a psychological impact if that's what happens here.
It's a little bit of a scary prospect. I mean, the politicians talk about this kind of in tactical terms, and you know, maybe we should go over the cliff and this will get us more leverage, and I mean, they're talking about it like a chess game, but when you talk to some of the folks in the White House, you know, kind of behind the scenes, I mean, they say this is serious. I mean, if this happens, this is not just a chess game. These are people's lives and people's pocketbooks, and so, I mean, there are very real consequences to this.
Yeah, and I keep coming back outside of the Beltway and outside of the, you know, the chess game, you know, discussions that we seem to have. This is the Christmas season, this is the holiday season, this is when people would normally be shopping and going out to stores and buying things and actually trying to help boost the economy. Aren't people already starting to throttle back out of the uncertainty? And what does that mean for business?
Well, I think to some extent, but the striking thing has been the stock market has remained up even while this process hit the skids once again this week. So I'm not sure people actually believe, and I don't know about consumers, but my impression is that Christmas shopping has been reasonably good. So I'm not sure that this has been absorbed or believed by people, and maybe it shouldn't be, because maybe this is all bluffing, but I don't think the pre-January 1st economic impact has been all that great.
Well, the lesson we learned from the debt ceiling was that no one really pays attention until the last few days. And the last week with the debt ceiling, end of July, early August, it was just absolute mayhem with the financial markets. The stock market was going up and down 200 or 300 points a day. The downgrade came at the end of that whole process. It really snowballed quickly. And I think, quite frankly, the politicians haven't seen that, so they say, well, there's no impetus for us to act because, we can kind of manage this process and muddle through. But I think once people start really, zooming in on this, that's when things could get a little.
So the motivation for Republicans really is that they don't believe that if they agree to tax increases now, they'll get later the spending cuts that have been promised, and there's some evidence in history to support that. And secondly, I don't think they believe the president has really shown seriousness about wanting to go after entitlement programs, Medicare and Social Security. So they're arguing a long-term a strategy here when everybody else around this table and elsewhere is kind of more focused on the short term. I think that's a tough balancing act, and that's one of the reasons this isn't really coming together, I think.
Right, and both sides think that the other side has not been serious enough about.
You hear that word, get serious.
Right.
You heard that phrase a lot.
Right, that's what Boehner said in his 51-second press conference was,
exactly.
Get serious soon. And he thinks that the president hasn't been serious about making cuts, and the Democrats think that the Republicans aren't serious enough about raising revenue.
Right.
And so.
Well, there's your basic disconnect. What does serious mean in this process?